The wheat whispered in the wind, brushing against itself like old ghosts, murmuring secrets. The sun dipped low, bleeding gold into the sky, smearing the edges of the prairie in amber light. From afar, the land looked endless, sacred, silent. But Ezekiel, Zeke Hart, knew better. This land never stayed quiet for long. He was fixing a split-rail fence when he heard it, barely a sound, more like breath caught in wind, a rustle, a broken rhythm. He turned, hand on his hip where his revolver lay holstered. At first he saw only the waving wheat, heads bobbing in the twilight. Then a shape, small, unsteady, staggered into view. A child, native, barefoot, limping. Zeke's jaw tightened. The girl's legs trembled as she tried to run but collapsed onto her knees, breath rasping from cracked lips. Her feet were raw and bloodied, streaked with red and filled with sharp prairie thorns. She looked up. For a split second, the sun caught her eyes, dark and full of terror. Zeke dropped the lasso in his hand. He didn't think. His boots crunched through stalks as he crossed to her and knelt. Carefully, she flinched. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, saying nothing. Then, gently, he reached for her foot, eyes soft with something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. At dusk, the land itself held its breath. The frontier stretched from the broken spines of the Rockies to the muddy veins of the Mississippi, raw and aching after war. Just a few years earlier, Zeke had ridden through Tennessee with the Union cavalry, torching fields that weren't his, carrying orders too heavy for his conscience. The South surrendered, but the killing didn't end. The borderlands became a new kind of battlefield, settlers surging west, treaties crumbling like paper soaked in whiskey, and native nations forced further into exile. Zeke's ranch stood on land that had once belonged to the animals. No one asked them before staking fence posts. Government men came with ink, others with guns. The prairie didn't care. It grew wheat over bones, the same as it did over seeds. He had bought this land cheap, too cheap. Said nothing when neighbors whispered of old raids, stolen horses, missing sons. He minded his business, kept to the soil, spoke only when necessary. The wind here was sharp and words had a way of getting buried in it. Years ago, he wrote letters to a woman he loved back in Virginia. When the replies stopped, he knew what it meant. Typhoid swept her county that winter. Then his brother died. 2 years later, rattlesnake bite. No help for miles. Zeke stopped writing, stopped feeling. Now he sat on the barn floor, holding the girl's foot. Each thorn he pulled was followed by a faint wince, a twitch of her hand. She never spoke, never cried. She just watched him with guarded eyes, her breath short and shallow. A dog barked in the distance, and Zeke paused. Sweat beaded along his temple despite the chill. His fingers trembled not from fear of the child, but of what might follow. He had seen what happened when a white man touched the daughter of the enemy. He had also seen what happened when he didn't. He poured a splash of whiskey from his flask onto the cleaned foot. She hissed but didn't pull away. Her skin was fever warm. Zeke laid a damp rag across her forehead and whispered under his breath, "You're safe, little one, for now." A low sound drifted across the field. Not thunder, not wind, a rhythm, ancient, alive. Zeke rose and stepped outside the barn, the screen door creaking behind him. The wheat had gone still. In the dim horizon light, shadows moved. Human shapes stole deliberate walked in a line across the far edge of the field. Warriors, their silhouettes were backlit by the dying sun. They carried long poles carved with animal figures and sacred marks, totems, symbols of protection, lineage, and land. Their weapons hung by their sides, but none were drawn. Zeke didn't breathe. The girl was in his barn, her blood on his hands, her scent surely still fresh. If they believed he had taken her they'd bury him where he stood. His rifle was inside. He didn't reach for it. What good would it do? His pulse thundered in his ears as the warriors came closer, wheat parting before them, like river water. They stopped 20 yards from him. Neither side moved. Behind him he heard the faint creak of the barn door again. The girl stood there swaying weakly, clinging to the post. She stepped out. Zeke turned his hand half raised to stop her but then froze. The smallest of the warriors stepped forward. No words, only the sound of boots pressing stalks. He knelt before the girl. She hesitated, then reached out and touched his shoulder, fingers barely making contact. The warrior bowed his head and closed his eyes. A soft wind passed through the field. The warrior looked up at Zeke. Their eyes locked. No hate, no thanks, only a reckoning. Then, he lifted the girl into his arms with quiet grace and stepped back. The others parted for him. No one spoke. The wheat rustled again. Zeke stood alone as they walked back the way they came. carrying her like she was a sacred offering reclaimed. He exhaled, long and slow, heart pounding like a war drum inside his ribs. As the last figure vanished into the prairie twilight, Zeke fell to his knees and stared at the blood still smeared on his calloused hands. The land, once again, went still, and, far away from deep within the darkness, a single flute began to play. The first light of dawn stretched its fingers across the prairie, laying long shadows between Zeke's weathered cabin and the tribal circle that had appeared like a silent sentinel overnight. The embers of a shared campfire flickered low, casting orange tongues across the dust and wheat-stained boots of two men who hadn't spoken since the night before. Zeke sat sharpening a post with his pocket knife, eyes fixed on the pen he was building a small, stable space for Little Star. She'll return. He worked with slow, purposeful strokes, the kind that come when there are more thoughts than words. Across from him sat Kaeda, his movements deliberate as he carved a small totem from cedar, its form taking shape with each smooth draw of the blade. He didn't look at Zeke, not directly, but their awareness of each other filled the space between them. Smoke rose between them like a fragile peace. Then the thunder of hooves broke the stillness. A wagon rolled into view at the edge of the wheat. Zeke stood, jaw tightening, Coyote's carving paused mid-stroke. From behind the crest, dust billowed. Armed riders flanked the wagon, rifles slung over their shoulders. Zeke could already tell trouble had found them. The lead rider was Bartley, a neighboring rancher with a mouth as sharp as barbed wire and a heart twice as hard. He drew his horse to a stop, eyes scanning the Scene's fence line, the tribal camp, the embers still warm. "Well, I'll be," Bartley drawled, spitting tobacco to the ground. "Didn't think I'd see the day." Zeke hearted break. Bred with redskins, Zeke didn't flinch. "They're not here for a fight." Bartley laughed, but there was no humor in it. Behind him his men fingered their triggers. "Don't matter why they're here. You bring that filth onto white land, you get white justice. You think the rest of Usul sit quiet while you turn your ranch into a damn tribal outpost." Kayet stood slowly. One by one, his fellow warriors stepped forward from the brush. No weapons raised, but their presence was like stone pressing on a soft earth. Zeke raised a hand. "No one's looking for blood." Bartley's eyes narrowed. "You housing that girl they took back. Rumor says she ran from them. They want her dead. And you dragged her back into their hands." "That girl would have died if I'd left her in that field," Zeke said, voice calm. "Even she didn't run, she got lost. And they came to get her peacefully." Bartley snorted. "You don't get it, do you? These folks don't do peace. They wait, like wolves. Then they take your horses, your wife, your kid." Zeke stepped forward, every line of his body taut. "Go back to your land, Bartley. Ain't nothing here for you but fence posts and firewood." A long silence. One of Bartley's men cocked his rifle. Coyote's hand moved subtly to his side, fingers brushing the hilt of a blade tied at his belt. Zeke saw it unraveling. Decades of hate boiling up in a moment that could change everything. His chest clenched. And then the wind hit. A shrieking gust swept through the field, bending stalks and kicking up dust like a wall of sand. The wagon rocked on its wheels. A second gust followed, fiercer, tearing Bartley's hat from his head and flipping the canvas on the wagon storm. Someone shouted. The sky darkened, the wind howled. Thunder cracked in the distance. A third gust hit and Bartley's wagon tipped, wood splintering as it rolled onto its side. One of the men was pinned beneath it, screaming. Chaos. Zeke didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the wagon, ducking low beneath the angry air, grabbing the edge of the wheel with both hands. Kyoto was there too, already working the man's legs free from the axle. Bartley, stunned, shouted something lost in the wind. His men scrambled to grab their gear. The storm didn't care who they were. Rain pelted the field sideways, turning dust to mud in seconds. Together, Zeke and Kyoto pulled the injured man clear. Zeke wrapped his arms around the man's chest and dragged him behind the broken wagon. Kyoto shielded them with a canvas tarp. Lightning cracked. The sky growled like an old god waking up angry. And still they moved. Not white, not native, just men. When the last of the wind died, the field looked like a battlefield, torn, wet, and littered with the debris of lives too brittle for such wrath. Rainwater dripped from hats and shoulders. No one spoke for a long time. Zeke sat on a stump near the barn, catching his breath, his hands filthy with mud and blood. Kayata stood beside him, watching the last of the black clouds drift away. One of the totem poles had fallen, split down the middle, a symbol of protection, now broken. Zeke walked to it slowly, lifted it from the mud, and laid it carefully beneath the porch's edge like something sacred. Kayata approached Little Star, who stood trembling by the barn. He knelt beside her, cupping her face gently with his large, weathered hands. He wiped the rain from her cheeks, murmuring something Zeke didn't understand. She smiled through tears. Zeke watched them. His heart twisted in ways he couldn't name. Kayata glanced up and met his eyes. There was no animosity there, now only something deeper, a silent, complicated respect. The storm had shown them all something. What, exactly? Zeke wasn't sure yet. He walked out into the field, surveying the damage. The wheat lay crushed in every direction, as if giants had marched through it. The fence was down in places. The barn had lost one shutter, yet all of it felt less important than before. He crouched down, scooping a handful of wet soil into his palm. The earth smelled alive. It pulsed with the same weight it always had, but now it carried memory, too. Shared sweat, shared danger. His thoughts unraveled in the quiet. Maybe some storms are meant to wash away more than just dust. Maybe they tear down what no words ever could. Behind him, he heard a child's laugh, light, surprising, cutting through the silence. Like a sunbeam through clouds, Little Star stood near the water trough, trying to catch raindrops in her hands. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes were bright. She laughed again. Zeke smiled, not out of politeness, not to mask pain. Genuinely. And as the wind quieted, and the land began to breathe again, Ezekiel Hartford, the first time in a long time, felt like maybe he still belonged to something worth protecting. The night air hung heavy around the homestead, still carrying the scent of wet soil and ash. Crickets pulsed in the darkness like a nervous heartbeat. Inside the dimly lit barn, Zeke knelt by Little Star, wrapping a fresh strip of linen around her leg where a jagged scratch had reopened. The girl's breath was even now, her face peaceful, but Zeke's hands trembled. Lantern light flickered against the rough wood. Shadows danced like old ghosts across the walls, resurrecting memories he'd spent years trying to bury. As he secured the bandage, his eyes drifted unwillingly to the dark recess of the barn. The smell of blood, the sudden crack of rifle fire. It came rushing back, his brother's voice hoarse, terrified, owed in his ears. Zeke, behind you, gunfire, screams. A moment too slow, a glance too late. His brother collapsing in his arms, crimson pooling under him in the dirt of an ambush that was never supposed to happen. A Union patrol gone wrong. Zeke had held him, helpless, as the breath left his lungs. Zeke swallowed hard and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The barn blurred. He bowed his head, breathing through the guilt like it was smoke in his lungs. Every night since, the silence had felt like punishment. Behind him, a soft movement, bare footsteps on hay. Kayata approached, quiet as a memory. She didn't speak, just reached into her satchel and extended a small totem carved in dark cedar. A hawk encircled a wounded deer, their shapes intertwined. Zeke took it. His hand brushed hers, rough, calloused, steady. She gave a slow nod. Forgiveness, balance. He clutched the totem like a lifeline. Dawn broke slowly, its light warm and forgiving. Zeke stood at the corral, coiling his lasso with methodical precision. The horses paced, sensing the day's restlessness. He tossed the rope over a post, whistled low. One of the mustangs twitched its ears and stepped forward. Zeke smiled. Behind him, Kayata moved like a mirror, her form deliberate, copying his motions with grace. She'd watched him enough to know the rhythm of the land. He showed her how to coax the horse, where to touch to gain trust. She nodded, silently, repeating the movement. Later they moved together across the pasture. She showed him how to spot dew-darkened grass, the sign of a predator's path, how to press his palm against the earth and feel the tremble of coming thunder. She knelt beside wild sage, touched the stalk, and nodded to the sky. Rain within 2 days, she gestured. Zeke nodded back, grinning slightly. They didn't need words. There was something sacred in that. When Zeke handed her his canteen, she accepted it without hesitation. When she extended a handful of dried berries later, he took them. It was a rhythm, now passing tools, lifting bales together, nodding when one stepped forward to help the other. A silent contract. Little Star played nearby, her small hands weaving stalks of wheat and wildflowers into something between a crown and a dream. She glanced up, watching them. Her eyes sparkled with something more than safety, joy. Zeke caught her gaze and lifted a brow. She giggled and darted off. That night, under the rust-colored sky, the three of them shared a meal beside the barn. No ceremony, just fire, food, and a quiet that no longer felt empty. But the peace was not built to last. It started with whispers. A rider came by late one afternoon, horse foaming at the mouth, eyes wide. A bandit gang, he said, rough men, war-scarred and greedy, moving east with speed and malice. They'd raised 2 ranches already, took cattle, took worse. They're circling, the rider warned, looking for weakness. By the next morning, Zeke's neighbors were avoiding him. He saw them watching from the ridge, talking low, shaking. Their head. Zeke's gone soft, one said, letting them live in his barn. They'll get him killed. Kayata stood by the fence, expression unreadable. She heard it. She heard all of it. That night the prairie sky was too quiet. No owls, no crickets. Just the hush before something terrible. Zeke climbed the ridge alone and raised his spyglass. Far off beyond the far edge of his land, campfires danced. Not tribal fires. These burned low and dirty, meant for concealment, not ceremony. He counted 5, maybe 6. The figures around them were broad, ragged, armed. Dokai, RTAH appeared behind him, silent as always. Zeke lowered the glass and exhaled through his nose. Bandits, he muttered. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Back at the barn, he paced. The child was asleep inside. Kayata leaned against the post, her eyes tracking his every turn. Thoughts churned like floodwaters. If he stayed, they'd come. If he ran, they'd follow. He had enough ammo for a fight, but not a war. He sat on the porch, arms on his knees, staring out into the dark. All his life, he'd run from pain, left the army, left the East, left his past buried in fields like this. But now, everything he'd tried to bury had come crawling back, older, meaner, and armed with fire. He reached into his coat and pulled out the hawk and deer totem Kayata had given him, turned it in his fingers. The wood was warm from his palm. Memories clashed with a moment. The blood on his brother's shirt, the way little Star had smiled through the rain, Kayata's steady hand in the storm. He looked up. She was still there, watching. Their eyes met. And then, without a word, she stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. His breath caught. Her palm was solid, grounding him in a storm no weather could match. They sat there in silence, shoulder to shoulder. In that stillness, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close enough to hold on to. Zeke gave a slow nod. He would fight, but not just for land. He would fight for something better, for something new. The wind was still in the hour before sunrise. Only the scrape of metal on wood broke the silence as Zeke pushed rifle rounds into a box with practiced hands. His brow furrowed in deep thought. Each click of brass into place was deliberate, controlled. His breath formed small clouds in the chill morning air, and yet sweat gathered at the base of his neck. This wasn't fear. It was readiness. Nearby, Kayata moved like a shadow. She tied fresh totems onto tall poles they had driven into the ground through the night, each one marked with animal spirits, feathers, bone, and dyed sinew. With reverence, whispering something too ancient for translation. Warding symbols, protectors, not for superstition, but for purpose. This land deserved more than bullets. Zeke stood and looked at the line of makeshift barricades they'd constructed. Fallen timber, overturned carts, barrels of water. Not much. But maybe enough. Little Star watched from the cabin's porch, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were too old for her age. She could feel the storm coming, not of weather, but of men. Zeke met her gaze. She nodded once, solemn. She understood. The wind picked up, the wheat began to stir, and then, from the horizon, came the sound. Hooves. The first bandit burst through the tall stalks with a howl, rifle raised high. More followed, half a dozen riders, shouting, hungry for fire and gold. They surged like a wave across the field, weapons glinting. Zeke didn't flinch. He raised his rifle, braced it on the fence, and fired. One of the riders tumbled off his horse with a grunt. Kayata moved like a spirit. She sprang from behind cover, with a sharp war cry, tomahawk in one hand, rifle slung across her back. Her feet barely touched the ground as she zigzagged through wheat, ducking and leaping with uncanny grace. Gunshots cracked like thunder. Dust exploded around them. Horses screamed. Bullets tore through wood and air. Zeke fired again, dropping another rider who got too close. But then a flash, a muzzle flare from the right, and Kayata spun with a cry. Her shoulder clipped. She stumbled, falling into the dirt. Zeke's breath caught. No time to think. He charged forward through the chaos, dropping to his knees beside her. Another shot buzzed past his head. He grabbed her under the arm and dragged her back behind a fallen totem, his boots kicking up soil. Hold on, he muttered, voice raw. Her eyes fluttered, pain narrowing them, but she clutched his wrist. No panic, only trust. Blood stained the edge of her tunic. Zeke yanked a bandage from his vest pocket and pressed it into place. Above them, smoke curled. The battle still raged. Kayata's fingers curled around her rifle. With Zeke's help, she steadied it, leaned into cover, and aimed. She fired once, twice, 3 clean shots. Bandits dropped. Zeke took a breath and stood tall, stepping out into the open. The remaining bandits hesitated. Their leader, broad-shouldered, spurred his horse toward Zeke with a roar, pistol raised. Zeke didn't fire. He dropped the rifle and charged. They met in the middle of the field, fist to jaw, elbow to ribs. Dirt flew. The pistol skittered away. Zeke landed a punch that snapped the man's head back, but the bandit came back swinging, driving Zeke to the ground. Then Zeke's hand closed around a broken fence post. He swung. The bandit collapsed, unconscious. Silence fell, broken only by the rustle of wheat and the clink of spent shells. The sun crested the hills, spilling gold across the battlefield. Kai RTH stood, shoulder bleeding but smiled defiant. Zeke walked to her, limping, breathing heavy. They stood in the light, surrounded by smoke and wreckage, and knew they'd won not just the fight, but something more. From the tree line, the rest of Kayata's people emerged, all silent, dignified. They had watched, waited. Now they came forward, not with judgment but respect. One of them stepped forward and handed Zeke a new totem, freshly carved. He accepted it with both hands, nodding once. Kayata leaned against a post, bandaged tight. Across her wound, Zeke knelt and checked it carefully, hands gentler now. She winced and smirked. "You're terrible at stitching," she rasped. "Good thing you're tough," he replied. Behind them, Little Star danced between the stalks, picking up feathers and tying them to the fence posts. Zeke turned to the gathered warriors. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You helped save this land today. This home, you'll always have a place here." He walked to the broken corner of the fence and drove the new totem into the ground, pressing it firm. "Belongs to all of us now." Weeks passed. The sky seemed broader. The wheat grew straighter. The ranch stood, changed. Where barbed wire once marked borders, now stood alternating totem poles and hand-built posts. Wheat rows curved to avoid sacred markers. Chickens wandered freely near the cabins. Children from the tribe came to help tend the fields. Neighbors stopped by, awkward at first, then warmer. Kayata, with her arm finally healing, spent her days teaching Little Star how to ride bareback. But the day came when she had to go. She stood at the edge of the trail with Little Star and Zeke, bag slung over her shoulder, a carved rifle across her back. No farewell speeches, no tears, just a long look between them. Zeke offered his hand. She took it, then clasped it tighter. He tried to speak, but nothing came. She smiled and turned, walking into the golden light, her silhouette growing smaller between the wheat and the wind. Zeke stood, silent. Little Star tugged his hand. "She'll be back," she said. He nodded, then turned toward the viewer, his face weathered but softened. "We walked different paths, but found one together. If this story stirred something in you, reflect on where walls could become bridges. Like, comment, subscribe, and carry this with you." The screen faded. One final shot. A lone totem swaying gently in a field of ripened wheat. Sun pouring down like forgiveness. Hope, tempered by memory.